Okay, good morning, everybody. How are you doing today?
Very good.
Don't all talk at once. Yeah, it's great to see you. Okay, well, whatever. So, what we are doing today is we're going to continue our conversation to a new topic. Did anyone have any questions about last time? What did we cover last time? Trade. Excellent. Now we dive into income inequality. There's no questions about trade. Before we dive deep into it and start to talk about it in great detail, we need to do a couple of clarifications. Oh, it's really dark. First, we need to distinguish between a flow and a stock. Because when we have conversations about income inequality, sometimes people will get these two things confused. And so as a matter of being precise with our language, we should draw this distinction. Has anyone heard the terms flow and stock before? Yeah. So it's kind of related to stock market. It's kind of related to that. The language is going to be a bit confusing if you think in those terms, but you'll see there's a little bit of an overlap. So imagine we have water coming out of a faucet, and it goes into a sink. The flow is the water going into the faucet. It's coming out of the faucet. The stock is the water in the sink. The flow is the rate of change. The stock is how much there is. For example, one example of stock is population. How many people are in a particular state or in a country? What would be a flow? If population is a stock, what would be a flow?
The growth of population.
So, for example?
The birth rate.
Birth rate. Just births. Right? And people throwing in how many people are there. You can also throw in deaths, right? Just as there's going to be an increase, there's also going to be a decrease. That's the rate of change. Is income a flow or a stock? A flow. Right? If income is a flow, then what would be the stock? So think bigger than that, begins with a W. Wealth. Now somebody brought up stock market, or the stocks, which are really shares of a company. What is like a share that you buy and sell, like the stock market, or a stock that you buy and sell? What does that represent? Yeah.
Ownership.
Ownership. Ownership of what?
Part of the company.
Part of the company. And so if you own a part of the company, you own some bundle of assets the company has. And these assets are stock. So it's weird, but a stock is an example of a stock, which is like. But stock is also going to be part of someone's wealth. Other parts of their wealth could be money in a bank account. It could be other assets they own, like a house. It could be also, on the negative side, how much debt that they owe, how much money that they owe. What's the total debt? You just take this chair. There's no more chairs. Take it. I don't know why it's here. Put it in there. Oh, there's a chair right there. Okay. I don't know why this is here. I bring this up because people will use income and wealth interchangeably. They are two distinct things. You can have high income people who also have low wealth, and you can have high wealth people who also have low income. Granted, if you have high wealth, you typically have high income, and low wealth, low income, but they are not interchangeable terms. Can you think of somebody who has lots of wealth but maybe low income?
A retiree.
Retirees are classic examples, right? They have a lot of assets, especially if they own their own house, but they're not making any money. And the really only money that they make is money that when they sell off their assets, when they sell some of their stuff. Can you think of someone just the opposite? High income, very low wealth.
Someone who just
Someone. What do you mean by someone who just made it rich?
like you hit the lottery or something.
Okay, so they just like they suddenly and they opt for the because you would then have to opt for the annuity. So there's two options when you win the lottery. You can get a whole bunch of money up front, or you can choose to say, I just want to get regular payments for like 20 years. And what you're saying is I'm going to get the payments for 20 years. Yeah. Okay. You could also argue, though, that you have a guaranteed access to those flow of payments, which in itself is an asset. And in theory, you could buy it. So possibly, not necessarily what I'm thinking of, but fair enough.
Someone living beyond their means.
Someone living beyond their means has high income and low wealth. Could you elaborate?
They make a lot of money comparatively. Like they make like $200,000 a year, but they're like spending all of it as soon as they get it. They're not saving anything. They're not sitting on useful assets.
Right? Like, yeah, like the money is flowing in, but as soon as it flows in, it flows out, right? And so the net flow, the net income is really close to zero, so they don't have a chance to build wealth. The classic example, another classic example is somebody who just graduated from med school. Right? They have a lot of income, right? Because they just become a doctor and they can be paid like a doctor, but they also have a lot of debt. So we don't want to use these interchangeably. Now, there is also this habit, this nasty habit that people have, where they will say things like, a lot of people are suffering from inequality. And to me, that does not make any sense. Why do you suppose it doesn't make any sense? What do people mean when they say some people are suffering from inequality?
People are suffering in poverty.
People are suffering poverty, right? That's what they mean. Income inequality is about the distribution. The distribution of income. But that's not the same thing as saying that you can have like a very unequal distribution of income, but you can also have a situation where even the poorest people are pretty good. Similarly, you can have very little inequality and have a position where just everyone's really poor. Like, well, these are people that have very low levels of inequality. It's a society with very low levels of inequality. But at the same time, because everyone is so poor, it is not a situation where like they are really well off. Right? So don't swap out distribution with average. Those are two different ideas. How many of you have had stats? Right? Another way to think of distribution in stats, there's a term for it. Have you heard it? Standard deviation, right? Standard deviation is the distribution. Well, but that was a distinct concept from the what? I think I already said it. Imagine you have, maybe the richest are here, and the poorest are here. Or the richest are here, and and the poorest are here. Which one has a higher standard deviation? The one on the left or the one on the right? The right has a higher standard deviation. The right also has more inequality. But the what is roughly the same? The mean. Or, since we don't have the actual data, we don't necessarily know if the mean is the same, but because we don't know the details, but the central tendency, relatively speaking. Central tendency, side note, is the general term for mean, median, mode. So the central tendency is roughly the same, but the distribution is different. I bring this now, in this scenario, we have a situation where if we're to go from here to here, then surely you can say inequality and poverty are kind of the same thing. But that's a special case. When people talk in terms of reducing inequality to help people, they're talking about a special case. What do you think? What do you think they're thinking of? When does lower inequality help poor people? Yeah. Sure, but when would going from here to here clearly helps poor people, right? So how would we do this though? How would we accomplish this? Yeah.
When people are provided or have the ability to get the resources they need.
Mm-hmm. How would we get those resources though? To help them? Taxes, right? And so the classic story of taxes and transfers. Where you tax the rich and transfer to the poor. This certainly reduces inequality. You're literally making the richest people less wealthy, and you're giving money to the poorest people. By definition, it's going to shrink the gap. As we will discuss, though, while it can help poor people, there's no guarantee it will. It might help poor people. And this is where things are going to get complicated. When people say reducing inequality is the same thing as helping poor people, they're imagining this very straightforward, I take money from Peter, I give it to Paul. And as a common sense, certainly makes sense. Just as a matter of mathematics, I can see why people might make that mistake. But it's going to be more complicated than that, which is why we emphasize reducing inequality is just logically not the same thing as helping the poor. So we're going to build this out. Pi. How many of you like pi? Raise your hand if you like pi. This should be more than that. Jonathan, what's your favorite kind of pie? Pumpkin. Oh, pumpkin pie is a great pie. Do you like John or Jonathan? I can't remember. Jonathan's fine, but you do go by John or John? You go by you go by Jonathan. You're a Jonathan guy. Okay. Let's imagine we have this nice big piece of pie, a nice big pumpkin pie, and I'm going to cut Jonathan a slice of this pie. I had to ask how he goes, but If you wrote John, that would be. So that's your slice of pie. Now I'm going to put in my slice of pie. Imagine we like pie equally, pumpkin pie equally. How do you feel about this, Jonathan?
Unfair to me.
Why is it unfair to you?
Because if you don't like it equally, you should get equal amounts.
Oh. Fair enough. Here's the fun part. Can you give me an economic justification? And I mean, employ an idea that we've discussed to justify why we should have equal amounts of pie. Anyone do that? Let's start small. When you had that bit of pie, Jonathan, you're probably still pretty hungry, right? Imagine hypothetically I give you more pie. Twice as much, more than twice as much. Are you happier? Yeah, right? Is this a pretty big improvement, right, in your happiness? Right, because you were pretty sad before. It's a pretty big improvement. How do I feel? That he has more pie and I have less. I'm less happy. How do I feel though? Am I a lot less happy? No, why not? I still have more? I still have more. What is this reminding you of? No? I mean, yes, but
Marginal cost.
close.
Marginal benefit.
Marginal benefit. Diminishing marginal benefit would predict that if we do this, if we take some amount from the very wealthy and give it to the very poor, in this case pies are a metaphor for income, someone gets a bigger slice of the pie, someone gets a smaller slice of the pie, then we would expect social totals, total utility would increase. Diminishing marginal benefit is the justification for that. And we see this in the real world. Imagine you took $1,000 from a really wealthy person. Would they even notice? No. Imagine you give that $1,000 to somebody on the street. How big of a difference would that be? It's a huge difference in that. Did you say none? Did you say none, David? Oh, okay. I missed. This is echoey. Yeah, right. Transformative. As a side note, by the way, I'm a fan of the charity Give Directly. Give Directly identifies people in very poor countries, some of the poorest people in these poor countries. I think they operate a lot out of Kenya, and they just send them money. And then you can go up on their website and you can see the things that they buy the money with. They buy with the money. Like, before I got this money, I was sleeping on the dirt. Now I can buy a mattress and not sleep on the dirt anymore. Or before, my house had a straw roof, which is really expensive and annoying to maintain. You have to constantly be getting new straw. Bugs live in them. They leak. It's really bad. I got rid of the straw roof. I replaced it with a metal roof. I'm much happier. That's a huge difference. It's like $100. It's a huge difference in their life. So this is an extreme example of demonstrating, yeah, okay, this makes sense. Diminishing marginal benefits justifies equal incomes because we can keep going, right? The gains will shrink, but they will still be gains up until we get half pie for you, half pie for me. Make sense? Okay. So it seems simple. Here's where it's complicated. Because all of you just assumed we find pies lying on the ground. Where do pies come from? Someone has to make it, right? People. Imagine this is my pie. that I made from scratch, and then I come in and I'm like, oh, Jonathan, I heard you like pumpkin pie. I'll give you a little slice. I give you a slice, and you say that's unfair. You should have half because that's what you said. Does this seem fair anymore? That he gets us? Does that seem unfair? That he gets a little slice, even though I made the pie? Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Saying yes, it's unfair. Are you going to take half my lunch too later today?
Yeah, I mean, it's inherently it's unfair.
Wait. Did you say yes, you will?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, it's unfair to take someone's pie.
Oh, I see. Well, I gave him the pie, but elaborate. So.
But I mean, in the scenario that the pie was made by you,
I
feel like someone should be grateful that they got any pie in the first place. Because not like you made the pie for Jonathan. I mean, you feel kind enough to give Jonathan a slice.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I thought you were going to go the other way on me, but you're absolutely right. Like all of a sudden, the context fundamentally changes. All of a sudden, when I gave him the slice of pie, I wasn't being stingy. I was being generous. If we have a world where every time I make a pie, I have to give Jonathan half, am I going to make more pie or less pie? Less. And this is the total amount. This represents the total amount of pie that I make over the course of a year. And then all of a sudden, I have to give up a lot of my pie to Jonathan. I might now only make this much pie. And Jonathan can have half. Which is bigger? Half, in this scenario, half of a small pie or a small piece of a large pie?
Small piece of large pie.
Small piece of a large pie, right? In other words, there's a trade-off here. We call it the equality efficiency trade-off. We recognize diminishing marginal utility. That hasn't gone away. Justifies equal income. At the same time, if you're going to say, well, everyone should make the same amount of money, like, well, now you're going to mess around with incentives. And suddenly people will not have the incentive to do the valuable things that need to be done. Incentives justify unequal incomes. And so the best way to frame the equality efficiency trade-off is as a question. How do you slice a pie? When the more equal the slices, the smaller the pie. Clearly, if we have perfectly equal incomes, then we will have this fundamental incentive problem. No one would deny that. And if we have perfectly unequal incomes, if we take the other extreme and have absolutely no redistribution at all, well, that's probably going like the incentive effect is probably not that strong at the very extreme. But in the real world, the United States and other countries have some version of this. There's some taxes and transfer system. And the question is, the conversation is, do you want more taxes and transfers? Do you want fewer taxes and transfers? And that is going to depend on magnitude. There's no doubt the pie shrinks when you have more equal income. The question is, does it shrink a lot? Or does it shrink just a little? If it shrinks just a little, then the incentive effects are relatively weak. They exist, but they're relatively weak, and you should want to favor more redistribution. But if you think that the pie shrinks a lot, then the incentive effects are strong. And you want to actually have less redistribution. In other words, this is why the taxes and transfers are not so straightforward. If we are here, let's make it bigger. The question is, we will either go, if we're in A, we will either go to something that looks like B, well, the average goes down a bit, but there is less inequality. Or the average goes down a lot. And that the poor are actually worse off. And the question is, are we going to be more B or are we going to be more C? I cannot answer this question for you. I don't know the answer. Nobody knows the answer. It's hard. There's a lot of diamonism. There's a lot of complexity. What I can do is give you a framework for thinking about what that answer might be so that you can have an intelligent opinion about it, an informed opinion. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah. Yeah. So let me give you an example. Let's imagine that everyone gets paid the same amount of money. Will there be a world, is this a world where people will want to be trash collectors? No. Why would you, right? You pay the same amount. So this is a situation where trash is piling up, where people want to take care of sanitation and work like, probably not enough. Or this is a world where people want to go become doctors, lawyers. Probably not, right? Some certainly will because they like doing it, but will enough? Probably not. And so you see, this is a world where we're poorer as a society because there's just no incentive to do the work that needs to be done, right? Just because something is valuable doesn't mean it's fun. And usually the two do not overlap. Great when they do, but usually not. So there's a story of an early settlement. I think it was Plymouth Rock. And the Pilgrims wanted to establish a collective situation where they all just shared the results of the harvest. No one had to work. There was no property, and we all just shared. And as a result, people just sat around doing nothing all day. Because why would you work when you only collect a small share of your benefits? And so they starved for the first few winters because nobody was working. Nobody was harvesting, right? There wasn't anything to grow. And then they established, William Bradford came in and said, this is stupid. He was the governor. And he changed the rules so people could have their own private property. And then they had bumper crops. This is one of the stories of the first. The first Thanksgiving has a lot of different stories around it. This is one of those stories. This is one of those stories that is really a story about private property and about incentives. Any other questions? A great question. Any other questions? So, one way then to kind of answer this is to figure out why do some people make more money than others. And the one that I want to emphasize, well, I'll list the other ones in brief out of for issues of time. I used to do a whole big thing, but I think in the interest of time, I decided to cut it down. But it's still worth talking about one of them in detail. And that's compensating differentials. I specifically mentioned trash collectors. Does anyone know how well trash collectors get paid? I have my computer up here. I was going to look it up. But then, I hadn't touched it in so long. It'll look me up. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. How long were you waiting out there?
Just like a second.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I was concerned that I was so oblivious I didn't see. Does anyone know how much trash collectors get paid?
A lot of trash collectors in like New York City make six figures. You know,
6 figures?
in New York City.
And aren't a lot of them union positions, so they get good
Somewhat.
negotiations.
It's going to be partly due to that. But there's lots of union positions that are not being paid 6 figures. Because do you even like what kind of education do you need to be a trash collector?
Probably some kind of certification.
Certification, maybe.
It's like 37.
Is it that's U.S. average, right? Or is that just specific to Maryland and just specific to our county? So let's actually just pull this up because this is an opportunity to show you one of my favorite websites. The Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps track of lots of cool information, and they have, and this is one of the things the U.S. does is it provides a lot of data. We're really good at providing data. And one of the things that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does is it creates something called the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And it gives you information not just on individual, like not just the salaries of individual positions, like we'll say trash collector. Okay, where is it? Like most websites, it's not. Okay, hand laborers and material movers. It also gives you things like, what's the entry-level education? What's the work experience related none? What's the job outlook? Like, how much is it going to grow? So it can give you some valuable information when you're thinking about what career you want to do. Unfortunately, they don't break it down by trash collectors, but you can see, like, you know, it's not bad. There's a lot of job security. Trash collectors specifically, I was hoping they had that.
Could be under a different name, like waste management.
Waste management or something? Yeah, because I'm like, this looks like just delivery stuff. But they said see hand laborers and material movers. So environmental engineers, I don't know if I want wastewater treatment plant system operators. Ooh, they can make 58. And they need only a high school diploma. 55, oh, 50, I'm sorry, 55,000 a year. High school diploma. Job outlook doesn't look great. We're getting about, okay, average salary in Maryland. I mean, this is AI, they might be lying. It's not bad, my point is. Because put it in the context of what the job is. It doesn't require a high school. It usually doesn't require a high school diploma. It certainly doesn't require a college degree. Why do they pay pretty well? Not amazing, but certainly better than retail. Why is it paid so well?
Get people to do it.
What?
To get people to do it.
Well, why do you need to get? What do you mean? I like where you're going with that, but like that's true of everything, right? You want to pay them to get them to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if they pay you $4 an hour to collect trash, no one would collect trash. That's not worth.
Why?
Like it's not worth it
Because what's special about trash collecting?
because you get paid $15 an hour to work at Chick-fil-A. So it's like you're getting paid $4 an hour to collect trash, and you just work at Chick-fil-A for 15 hours.
And you're absolutely right. But I need you to say the thing explicitly. I want to emphasize because trash collecting sucks.
Yeah.
Right. And it seems silly that I would bring it up, but that's kind of really important. Because trash collecting is you have to work outside, which sometimes is a benefit. Sometimes when the weather is bad, it's not. You're working with trash, which is inherently unpleasant. It's a dangerous job. I'm actually astonished it's paid as little as it is because it's dangerous. You're out there among traffic. You get hit by cars. Roofer, too, gets paid pretty well. They get paid $50,000 a year. No formal education required. No credential at all. Oh, look, and they're growing faster than average, 6%. Yeah. Why do you think they get paid so much?
Because it's like we need trash collectors. It's not like a lot of people want to. It's good
But what about roofers, though? Why are roofers paid so well? Because this is in a lot of ways better than trash collectors. No formal education credential. $50,000 a year. Yeah. Okay, but again, there's no formal training credentials required. So what was that? Dangerous. Yeah, tell me more.
Because you're working on something obviously have a lot of accidents.
Not only is it dangerous, it's among the most dangerous jobs. There's a different list all the time. Logging, aircraft pilots, derelict operators, roofers, number 4. Fatal injuries, 41 per 100,000 workers. Right. And as such, they get paid a lot. In other words, this is compensating differentials. The nature of the world is very varied. Working conditions are going to vary widely. And some jobs are just dangerous and hard and scary. And in order to get people to do them, you have to pay them more. It's not just, though, the danger aspect of it. There's lots of things that matter for jobs besides the nature. What's another thing that you might want to avoid in a job? Besides its levels of safety or its stinkiness. Something else that's considered unpleasant. The hours, what do you mean?
Like if you have to work, like for example, every single day or be on call.
Yeah, like the availability issue, the unpredictability of it. Absolutely. Right. Some jobs also, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say health concerns, like if you have to work with dangerous materials,
Mhm.
or if you're working in a loud environment where you could get hearing damage over time.
Yeah. Another example of that, there was a study done, an economic study done of nurses right when the HIV epidemic began. And people didn't keep in mind that when HIV first appeared, they didn't really know anything. They knew a little bit, they didn't know much at all. And nurses that happened to be operating in places where there was a lot of HIV infections, we had to compensate them for the danger. Compensated differential states differences in working conditions are offset by differences in pay. If a job is dangerous or hard or scary, if there's a high likelihood you'll get fired, then people say, I don't want to do that job, and so the only way they can attract people to that job is to pay them a lot. At the same time, there are jobs that are on the other end of that spectrum. One of my favorite examples is my job. What does the job of a professor entail? I don't know you know much, but you know a lot, because you see most of my job every day. What do we have to do? What's the job like? Yeah.
Teach.
Teach, right? Is it hard? And I know the socially benefit, like the social desirability thing is to say, oh yeah, teaching job is really hard. And it is sometimes. But literally, I just say the same thing over and over again. Like, the students change, the questions change. That's great, that's exciting, but I'm not having to constantly reinvent myself over and over again. If I'm wrong, if I tell you the wrong thing, there's not like a huge punishment for that. Well, if I was a lawyer somewhere and I tell my client the wrong thing, I could get disbarred. And in the worst extreme case, there's a real punishment for failure over there. I get summers off. I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. I don't have a boss in the conventional sense of the word, and my job entails talking about cool ideas with interesting people. That's my job. There's also a lot of grading. That's the bad part. That's like seriously the worst part about teaching is the grading. That's like what I'm really paid to do if I think about it that way. But as someone who has a PhD in economics, do you think I get paid a lot or a little compared to other people with PhDs in economics?
Probably underemployed.
So I don't want to say underemployed, that's a technical term. That means that you have a job that does not require a bachelor's degree, even though you have a bachelor's degree. But you're right, right? Paid less than others.
Yeah.
Right? That I am undercompensated compared to other people. That's because a lot of my compensation comes in the form of the nature of the work. So it goes both ways. Another great example of this, and things are changing as we talk, so this might be a bit obsolete, but federal workers. Federal workers do not get paid as much as they do in the private sector for somebody of their education level. And a big reason why they don't is because their job is less stressful than in the private sector. They have more job security than they do in the private sector. They have great benefits that they may not have in the private sector, like pensions and so forth. Sometimes their work levels are just lower than they do in the private sector. Part of the compensation is they just have a less stressful environment. And we're seeing now, like, people saying, oh, we need to fire federal workers, we need to give them less job security. And I'm like, okay, you do that, and if this becomes like a permanent change, you might make the job less pleasant, and in order to attract quality people, you're gonna have to pay them more. So there could be this unintended consequence of, in an effort to cut the federal budget, you might actually end up having to pay more because now people don't have the nice environment that they're used to. There's a trade-off. There's a complication. Any questions? So I bring up compensating differentials because it's this clear application of incentives justifying unequal incomes. Again, if we live in a world where everyone gets paid the same amount, then people will not want to do the unpleasant jobs. We'll have a lot of people who want to become artists and no one to take out the trash. I also have some life advice for you. Because the compensating differential story is always going to be based on market forces. Most people don't like the smell of trash, therefore trash collectors get paid a lot. But if you figure out how you are unusual, you can leverage the market forces to your advantage. How many of you enjoy accounting? Or even just kind of like it? Yeah, great. You should seriously consider being an accountant. Even if it's not your favorite thing in the world, you should seriously consider it. Why? Yeah. Yeah, why should you? You say you kind of like accounting, and I'm asking you why you like accounting. I'm asking, if you only sort of like accounting, why am I saying you should seriously consider a job in accounting? Okay, but you have interest in lots of things, I assume. Why? It's paid well, right? Because most people hate accounting, right? And so that's why I say, if you only kind of like, even if you only kind of like it, you should seriously consider a career because you will kind of like a job, but you will be paid as if you hate it. And that's a nice combination, right? I'm not saying you definitely should. It depends on lots of different factors. But I'm saying put that in the back of your mind. Figure out how you are unusual, and then you can leverage the market forces to your advantage. A lot of people like not having a boss. I strongly dislike having a boss. I am unusual in that way. I have a strong preference of being able to enjoy my day and what I'm talking about. I also have unusually cheap preferences. A lot of my hobbies are time consuming, but very inexpensive as far as the market price goes. So I'm unusual for this way, so this job is a great fit for me. Most people are not like me in that way. Not to the magnitude I am. So it's not enough to say, I really want to work for the ACLU because I really like the purpose. Lots of people like it. You have to unusually like it for it to be a good deal. Any questions? Okay. How are we doing on time? Oh, my goodness. So this favors more inequality. Other ideas that favor more inequality. Education and experience. Clearly, people who have more education, they have more skills, they tend to get paid more. People who have more experience are better at the jobs, they tend to get paid more. Another one, natural ability, like intelligence, or conscientiousness, or grit. Personality traits. Or inherent like attributes of somebody. This also favors more inequality because you want to generate the incentive for people to use these God-given talents. These three items, and I don't mean to imply that these are the only items that matter. These are just three examples. If you think the main reason why some people make more money than others is because they're doing awful work that other people don't want to do, that's stressful and time consuming and annoying, and they have all this like valuable education experience, and they just have like these abilities that's just better than the average person, then you should be very concerned about the incentive effects of making incomes equal. Because then people won't bother trying to get the education experience. People won't bother utilizing the natural abilities. People won't bother doing the kinds of work that really suck. At the same time, some people make more money than others, not due to any of these things, but due to other reasons. For example, some people just get lucky. They're born into a family that has connections. Some people, what's another one? Or there's a bigotry that favors them. That's another one. Some people just like the work. Sometimes what people's hobbies overlap with something that's actually productive. What did you say you're going to do this weekend? You biking in the snow? You hope there's biking in the snow. Like, if that was, if instead, Anthony, I'm really looking forward to, I can't wait to go home and program this, like, video game. Or program this new software development. Or program this new app that will make people's lives easier. Because I just like creating things and it's fun. Then taking money from him is not going to have a big incentive effect. Because he's already intrinsically motivated to do it. Note that this is a personality type, it's one that's fundamentally about incentives. It's like, I already have the incentive to do the thing. So if you change my my compensation, there won't be much of an effect. Might be some, but it won't be much of an effect. Some people make tons of money than others because there's lots of corruption. Because they get favors from the government, or they have some sort of protective monopoly power, or something like that. If you think that the big reason why some people make more money than others is due to like these luck and racism, or people are just intrinsically motivated so they'll do work anyway, or they're just like really corrupt and they're leveraging the market in their favor using some sort of political manipulation, then you should favor more equality because the incentive effects are going to be very small. Like the money was essentially randomly distributed, so changing the distribution isn't going to change behavior. People are naturally motivated anyway, so changing the distribution isn't going to change behavior. People were corrupt, so changing the distribution might actually increase the pie because people have less incentive to be corrupt. These things favor more equality. Again, I don't don't know how to slice a pie when the more equal the slices, the smaller the pie. But what I can do is give you a framework between these two. All of these things matter. It's just a question of magnitude. And nobody really knows for sure how big these magnitudes are. They're going to vary across industry. They're going to vary across location. They're going to vary across time. But at least it gives you a framework to think about this. Any questions? All right. I talked a lot there because I wanted to make sure we got through it. We haven't talked about it all yet, how we measure inequality. I know I gave you a lot of information, but we have like 15, 20 minutes left. So I'm just making sure we're good to go. Pause. I'm going to erase this then. I want to do this thing in the middle. Now, fundamentally, income inequality is about what, Richard? It's fundamentally about what?
Inequality.
Yeah. Like, what is it? What does it represent? What does it concern itself with?
Not sure.
Anyone remember? I wrote it here on the board.
Distribution.
The distribution, yeah. Right, it's the distribution of income. If we want to measure inequality, we have to turn something that is the distribution, which is all about individual numbers spread out across a large population, and turn it into one number that we can then compare across countries, across time, across however we want to do it. So we need to figure out a way to turn a distribution into a number. There's something called standard deviation. That gets us, that's conceptually nice, but that's not how we use it. In order to understand how we measure inequality, I'm going to have to first create a graph. Let's see, and it's really important that it's to scale. So I'm going to use my little eraser here to get it to scale. 2, 3, 4. Oh, we go. And hopefully this turns out well. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's fine. Okay. So this is going to be 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. This is going to be the percent of all families, from the poorest to the richest. $20, 40, 60, 80, 100. This is the percent of all income. Take all the income in a particular country, add it all up together, that's the percent of all the income. I'm now going to awkwardly make some graph paper. Just pretend it's a straight line. Ooh, that was really bad. That's okay, just pretend. And this one. There we go. So we have this kind of grid mark. Now, I'm going to need to create a reference line. This reference line is going to represent perfect equality. What would that reference line look like? A perfect equality reference line. Where everyone makes the same amount of money, yeah?
Go like diagonal from 0 to 20, 40 to...
Yeah, exactly. Like we would expect, right? 20% of the population would have 20% of the income, and 40% of the population would have 40%, and 60% would have 60%. Yeah, absolutely, diagonal, perfect. A nice 45-degree line. So if we wanted to create a number to represent inequality, our first step is to draw a picture. Because once you get a picture, then you can maybe do some math to it to find the actual number. What I will now draw in green is going to be what's called the Lorenz curve. The Lorenz curve represents the actual distribution. In this case, it's of income. It's going to have to follow certain rules. Where should it begin?
The 100%.
Why do I say 100? 100, there's two 100s.
Of 100% of it. Because they technically make up most of the income.
Well, 100% of the population has to make 100% of the income, right?
Wait, is it like the richest of the population, or is it?
It's going to be cumulative, so it's going to say, look, 100% of people have to make 100% of income.
Oh, okay.
Right? So endpoint 1. And what's the other endpoint?
0,
0, 0. It has to be here. Why 0, 0?
0 equals 0, 1.
Right? Yeah. If you're talking about nobody, then that means no income is accounted for. Because robots don't get income. Non-people don't get income. Not yet, anyway. 0, 0, right? Even then. Then are they people if they get an income? Weird. Okay. Now I'm going to draw a line to reflect that actual distribution. The question is, do I draw that line above the 45-degree line or below the 45-degree line? What do you say below?
Inequality.
Well, deeper than that.
Goes above would be unequal too.
Yeah, so what would the problem then? So which one is it? Is it above or below? Why? Well, I mean, if we're gonna, but like, why is it going to be below and not above? Anyone want to take this yet?
Because most people do not usually make, proportionally, the majority of people make less money than, how do I put this? The higher earners earn a larger percentage than the lower earners. It's what's it's like the top 1% and has 90% of the wealth or something. So
Yeah.
the lower.
Why can't I reflect that by going above the line?
Because then the lower percentage earners would be earning more than their category.
In other words, for one, if they're earning more, then you do have inequality. But you're right, they're earning more than the category. In other words, imagine I drew it like this, and so I'm intersected right here. That means the poorest 20% of people are making 80% of all the income. If they're making 80% of all the income, they're not the poorest 20%. Right? Anything above the line just mathematically does not make sense. Remember, it's the poorest to the richest. The Lorenz curve always has to be above the 45-degree line. I'm sorry, below. Below the 45-degree line. So I'm going to draw one. I'm going to draw it like, we'll draw it like this. This is one potential distribution of income. Individual countries will have different distributions. We'll have different Lorenz curves. And it gets complicated because there's also taxes and transfers that are broken in. Sometimes people do a pre-tax and transfer Lorenz curve, sometimes a post-transfer. So you always want to look out for that. And then even then, it's sometimes hard to count all the taxes and transfers. Okay, so in this scenario, we have 80% of people making like a little more than 20% of all of the income. And the poorest 20% are making like, what is that? Maybe like 5% of all the income. So this would be a sort of, you can get a sense of how the inequality goes. Okay. Good so far? Problem is, we don't have a number. Here's where we get the number from. I'm going to put it right here, actually. There it is. I want to emphasize, I'm never going to have you calculate this number. You just have to know what it means and where it comes from. But you never have to calculate it, because in order to calculate it, you really need calculus. If we draw the green line out more, does that mean more inequality or less inequality? More inequality, right? If we drew it closer, we hug it in, is that more or less? Less. Remember that 45-degree line represents perfect. So what we are going to do, and I did not invent this way, so don't blame me for it, but what we're going to do is we're going to find this area. And calculate this area. Again, you won't have to do it, but this is how it's done. And we're going to call this the Gini. Sometimes it's called a Gini ratio, sometimes it's called a Gini coefficient. What do I call it in my notes? I call it a Gini ratio. Okay, that makes sense. And it's just equal to the area between the 45-degree line and Lorentz divided by the area under the Lorentz group. As the Gini ratio goes up, that implies more inequality. It's worth emphasizing this point, because people generally think of inequality as bad, and they generally think of higher numbers as good. And so people will mistakenly believe if the Gini ratio is really high, that means there must be lots of equality. No. Gini ratio measures inequality. So if the Gini ratio is high, then there's lots of inequality, because this area is getting larger and larger. But if it shrinks down, if we push against that 45-degree line, then we have a pretty equal society. Now I have like 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions on this? Yeah, so you would technically take, if you want to do it, you would technically take the integral, right, or the antiderivative, right, and then you subtract all that stuff. Beyond the scope of the course, right? You don't require calculus. Anyone other questions? I want to bring down the, I'm waiting because I want to bring this down. And I want to show you inequality, measures of inequality across the world. But it's just worth emphasizing the Gini ratio measures inequality. Don't think of it as a measurement of equality, because then you might get this backwards. It measures inequality. All right. I'm going to bring this down, and we'll talk about it. And if you still want to see this stuff, we're almost done. Then I can bring it back up. You can write it down some more stuff. But let's. I want to get an image. Let's use this one. sometimes you'll get slightly different. Assuming we can get it to work. Sometimes you'll get slightly different terms for it. This one calls it a coefficient. Sometimes it's multiplied by 100, so you get different numbers. But note, darker areas mean a higher Gini ratio or a higher Gini coefficient. Here we have them. The darkest is 0.85 to 0.9, but then we can get lighter and lighter and all the way to green, which is not many countries. Inequality, bringing us back to the beginning, is not the same thing as average. There are countries that are very unequal, pretty unequal, and very wealthy. And there are countries that are very unequal and very poor. And there are countries that are pretty equal and wealthy. And there are countries that are pretty equal and poor. You know, like here's Pakistan, for example. Not necessarily. Here's Ethiopia. Not necessarily countries that people want to move to. So, again, these are two distinct. I also want to emphasize, I do not know if this is before taxes and transfers or after. It's annoying how often they do not specify that. So I don't think the U.S. is as unequal as it's implied, but I don't have the numbers handy on. I just wanted to illustrate that. Do not treat reducing inequality as the same thing as helping poor people. Those are two distinct things. Any questions? Okay, that's all I have for today. I mean, I can show you other things if you want, but we're kind of out of time anyway. I have historic data and yada yada. I gave you a lot. Anyway, next time we talk public choice, don't forget there's an ed puzzle that's due. So you want to do that tonight or tomorrow. And I will talk to you then.